This holiday season, the Christmas carol that has most been on my heart is "Do You Hear What I Hear?" The lyrics were written by Noël Regni. He was born in France in 1922 and attended the prestigious Strasbourg Conservatory and Conservatoire National de Paris. I took German, so that pronunciation was to train as a classical music composer. His aspirations were interrupted by World War II. When the Nazis occupied France, he was forcibly drafted into the German army, and so publicly he wore a German uniform, but he secretly joined the French underground. Whenever possible, he passed along information to the French resistance to warn them about German plans of attacks against them. His work as a spy culminated in leading a group of German soldiers into a trap where the French fighters caught them in the crossfire. Noël was also caught in the crossfire and was wounded. He had a bullet wound. But much more than his personal injuries that day, it was the horrors of war he witnessed actually on both sides that haunted him for years to come. These traumatic memories acted over time as a kind of melancholic muse for the Christmas carol he would one day write. But now I'm getting a bit ahead of the story. In 1951, after the war, he moved to the United States and one night happened to wander into the Beverly Hotel in Manhattan. And there he saw a woman playing contemporary songs on the piano. Now keep in mind, he was like this classically trained dude. He was like all about classical music. But he saw this woman playing these contemporary rock and roll songs, and it was a true story of love at first sight, or perhaps first sight and sound. Although he spoke almost no English and she spoke zero French, he took the risk of introducing himself. Her name was Gloria Shane. They were married less than a month later. So this French classical music composer and this American rock and roll artist. Her career took off a decade later in 1961 when the teen idol, James Darren, anybody remember this dude? All right, I see a few hands, recorded her song, "Goodbye, Cruel World," which hit number 3 on the Billboard charts in 1961. Her success convinced Noël, I don't know, maybe there's something to writing contemporary music after all. It's a little more lucrative than this classical gig. At the time, he was living with a lot of depression, and he had hoped that World War II would finally be this war to end all wars, that kind of lie that we keep telling ourselves. But then the Korean War broke out, and the Vietnam War broke out. And then in October 1962, he and the rest of the world were gripped by this imminent fear of the Cuban Missile Crisis, of imminent nuclear war. And in the middle of those harrowing 13 days, Noël found himself just wandering around the streets of New York City in despair about the state of the world when he happened to notice 2 mothers just pushing babies in a stroller. But it became this kind of rapturous, mystical moment that he kind of stumbled backward into. In his words, "They appeared to me like these little angels that were looking at each other and smiling, and all of a sudden, my mood that had been depressed for days became extraordinary." And the imagery and the opening lines of this soon-to-be famous song, it just began to enter his mind and his heart and his spirit. And it's not lost on me, as it may not be to some of you, that a man named Noël, the first Noël, with those deep resonances of birth, nativity, and Christmas, would come to write, a famous Christmas song. When he'd finished writing, he gave the lyrics to his wife, Gloria, just as she was heading out the door to go shopping, and she says, "Ironically, when I first thought of this first musical line, I was headed to Bloomingdale's." The couple could not have dared imagine the effect that "Do You Hear What I Hear" would have on the world. It was the height of the Cold War, and millions like Noël were yearning for just a little bit of hope and peace. Newspaper stories at the time wrote of drivers hearing this song for the first time on the radio. It's really hard to hear a song again for the first time. But when we were hearing this for the first time, multiple people just they just pulled over onto the side of the road. This wasn't Spotify. You couldn't hit back and you hear it again. So they pulled off the road because they just felt, I need to hear this song. I'll share just a few brief reflections about some of why this song resonated then and continues to resonate with many today. On the surface, the lyrics refer, of course, to the Star of Bethlehem from the biblical tale of Jesus' birth. A star, dancing in the night, with a tail as big as a kite. But just beneath the surface, especially for people that had just come out of the Cuban Missile Crisis, this song is also about the smoke tail that a nuclear missile or any missile would leave as it went through the air. This song is also structured around a profound four-part progression, kind of from below, of trying to reach the powers that be so that things like nuclear war don't happen. That first stanza is fascinatingly, to me, animist. Said the night wind to the little lamb. That's how this all begins, the wind whispering in the ear of a lamb. In the second stanza, the lamb passes the message to a powerless poor shepherd boy. Then in the third stanza, that poor shepherd boy boldly brings the message to the king. An innocent child is shivering in the cold, he tells the king. Let us bring him silver and gold. For my money, that sounds a lot like a plea for billionaires to redistribute wealth. Your mileage may vary. That would indeed, however, make for a Merry Christmas. Given the incoming administration, I'm not holding my breath at the moment. But in the song, we get a Christmas miracle, in stark contrast as well to that murderous response of King Herod in the Bible. This king of the song is kind of an anti-Herod. He hears the people's cry for justice and uses his position and his power to call on people everywhere to work for peace, goodwill, and light. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it turns out that Noel Rezhny was a member at various points of UU congregations, particularly in Connecticut, both the congregation in Westport and Danbury in particular. For this Christmas, Noel and Gloria's song that culminates in that bold proclamation, pray for peace, people everywhere. That's felt particularly poignant to me amidst these ongoing wars in Ukraine, in Sudan, and particularly in Gaza. For the second Christmas in a row, we looked at this last year as well at this time. In the actual modern city of Bethlehem, you find the traditional nativity scenes are variations on what has been called Christ in the rubble, to symbolize the disconnect between the idealized Bethlehem of most representations and the present-day reality in Gaza and the West Bank. As we hold all of this in our heart, in a few moments, the choir will sing all of Do You Hear What I Hear? And as you listen, I invite you to know any words or phrases that maybe stand out to you and how that might point you to how you may be called to work within your spheres of influence in the coming year for more peace and more justice everywhere.